we now have the technology to take ET home.
There are two types of UFOs, man-made, and I'm quoting, extraterrestrial.
We now know how to travel to the stars, and it's not going to take us our lifetime to do it.
We had mastered gravity control, at least to the point that we could get lift and under a controlled situation. What I've found is the more they know, the more they're followed. These CIA officers that were at his talk, and the more they are literally to the moment of death, and even if they're under anesthesia.
We get witnesses who come forward to share some pretty startling stories, and the next thing we get from them is, did you say anything to anybody? Because two guys just came to my house and told me to shut up. So, or reminded me of my oath.
Remember, I personally briefed the senator from Nevada, who, of course, is where Area 51 is.
Right.
And Senator Richard Bryan, met with him personally. He had absolutely no knowledge. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this show. I'm very proud to have Jan Harzan, who's the International Director of MUFON, on with me. He's been a great friend for many, many years, and thank you, Jan, for being with us.
Delighted to be here. Thank you, Stephen, for inviting me.
Yeah, I can't when we met. We met in the 90s.
Yeah, early 90s. We've known each other at least 25, maybe even 30 years.
I know.
And we're still young.
That's right. Look at us. Yeah. You go, girl. We're doing it. So it's great. I really appreciate you taking the time. And, those of you who've seen Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, if you haven't, you should, take a look at it. Jan Harzan is in there talking about a very interesting event that happened with the head of the Lockheed Skunk Works. So I just want to let people know what that is. Lockheed Martin is a very big aerospace company, contracts with the U.S. government. Their Skunk Works is really their classified, cutting-edge aerospace engineering division. And they have a big facility up near, not far from Edwards Air Force Base, around Palmdale, Lancaster, that area. Up in the high desert of California, east of LA. And what is interesting is, I remember, I think, Jan, you said you went to UCLA School of Engineering, and there was a talk going on there. You want to tell people how this meeting happened, or with the director of the Skunk Works? Exactly.
It was by happenstance. I mean, one day I was a donor to the School of Engineering every year, some of money, and you become a Bolter Associate. So what they would do is they'd put on 2 or 3 events a year from the alumni, and I got a letter in the mail basically saying, and I believe it was March 23rd, 1993 was the exact date, that Ben Rich, who had recently retired from the Lockheed Skunk Works, was going to become and sharing his history there, if you will, his time there.
Right.
I thought that was rather interesting, because here's a guy who's working in top secret stuff. And I might even mention, during his talk, one of the things he talked about was the F-117, which actually flew, I think, for the first time in 1984, if I'm not mistaken. And we didn't even know about it until 1994. But what's interesting to me, that means it's been almost 50 years since the Lockheed Skunk Works has produced an airplane, which I find very hard to believe, or a craft.
Right.
So think about that.
Right.
But I got this in the mail, and I reached out to my friend Tom Keller, who also went to the UCLA School of Engineering.
About 10 years. I knew him. Yes. Mm-hmm.
And I said, hey, Tom, you want to go to this lecture? Because I've got this invitation. I'm sure I could take a friend. And he said, sure. So we showed up. It was in, I think, the alumni building, if I recall correctly. There were about 200 engineer alumni there. Most of them from the aerospace industry, who came to hear Ben talk, and Tom and I put ourselves right in the front row.
Great.
And so Ben spent a good hour and a half going through a 40 or 50 slide set of all the aircraft that had been built by Lockheed Skunk Works since he had joined back in the early 60s, maybe late 50s. He started with the U-2 spy plane. Of course, he talked about the SR-71, which was the craft that he personally was in charge of. That propelled him to become the new CEO after Kelly. And he hit on a couple different points in his talk. This is just the normal talk he gave. One of them was that there were a lot of aircraft that they built that were one-of-a-kind prototypes that never got produced, which I found fascinating. which he shared with us. And the other was that he made the claim that there are no secrets in the world. And I thought that was interesting that he made that comment. This is pre 9/11, that there were no secrets in the world. He also made a very strong stand that the secrecy that they were put under at the Lockheed Skunk Works, he talked about being on the floor, the manufacturing floor, which was basically just a place where they built single planes. And there would be two men, basically in black. They were guys in their suits with their sunglasses on, who would stand in the corner in the shadow and just watch them the whole time. And he felt that was a little bit over the top, based on the fact that in 1989, 4 years prior, that the Berlin Wall had fallen down. And so he was making the case that, hey, we've had to have all these secrets because of the Cold War. Now that there's no Cold War, why are we keeping all these secrets? And he was very much about getting information out to the public. Wow. I could sense that in his talk. But the most startling thing to Tom and I was his last slide was a black disc zipping off into outer space. Now, these were slides, so that someone had, manufactured the slide. And he ended the talk with a quote, "We now have the technology to take ET home."
Right.
And the entire audience burst out laughing. They thought he was making a joke. And Tom and I just looked at each other. We said, did he really just say that? I mean, we're looking at each other like we're dumbfounded. He would say something like that. So afterwards, there was a polite Q&A, lasted about 15 minutes. And then, of course, the meeting adjourned. And about 20 of us gathered around Ben, and we started asking questions. And so at first, they were very nice questions. But eventually, a lady said, "So tell me about this propulsion system that's going to get us to the stars." And he looks around to see who's there. He actually made a comment in the actual regular meeting that he noticed 2 CIA people who were there to watch him. He actually said that.
Wow.
So she asked him about how this works, and he started to divulge some things. He talked about, well, you know how we built stealth, the F-117. He says it was all based on a Russian's mathematician, equations. And our engineers took those equations and we figured out what a craft would have to look like to evade radar. And that's why you have the F-117 looks so weird. It's all angular. He said, well, we figured out the air in the equations and we now know how to travel to the stars. And it's not going to take us our lifetime to do it. So we're like, oh, eyes wide open. We're listening to this whole thing.
Right.
And he just went on and on about these things. And he would always be looking around to see who was there, see if anyone was listening to him. And there was one guy there from Aviation and Space Week magazine. And I know he was being very careful what he said because he didn't want it to end up in Aviation and Space Week. But when he left, and as he's walking out, and he said some other things too, but as he's walking out, by now the crowd had dwindled down to about 5 people. I followed him through the room, and I caught him towards the back of the room, and I said, Ben, I said, I'm Jan Harzan. I said, I really enjoyed your talk. I'd like to know more about how this propulsion works. I mean, it's fascinating to me. And he looks at me and he's like, who are you? And he's looking around like, who's this guy? And he said, well, let me ask you a question. How does ESP work? And I thought, I don't know. I mean, so first thing that popped in my head was all points in space and time are connected. So I blurted it out. I don't know. All points in space and time are connected. He said, that's how it works. He turned around and walked out. That was my conversation with the guy.
Yep. That's awesome. And that's exactly right. The whole thing about the disc going out into space. Do you think that was a drawing or a photo?
No, it was definitely a drawing. It was a rendering. Someone had rendered it.
Right. But it was that shape.
It was a black disc, and it was literally, you could see the swish marks where the artist had been, looked like it's shooting off into space,
Right.
It was a good talk. My understanding is he also did the same talk at Wright-Patterson to a group of military people.
Interesting.
And I think Michael Shred actually has a copy of that talk, which I'm trying to get for our files as well.
Oh, but, yeah, definitely get that.
Ben, at the time, was in the process of writing a book called The Lockheed Skunk Works. And I bought the book, and it was the first edition book, and I read it cover to cover. And he didn't really say anything about any secret, but there were 2 words in the entire book that were italicized. You know what those words were?
One was UFO, wasn't it?
One was UFO. The other was alien.
Right.
Now, the sentences were like, people claimed that this looked like a UFO, and, people thought it was alien, or something to that effect. But I mean,
Right.
Why do you italicize those two words? I think he was trying to pass a message to us.
Sure.
That's what I got out of it anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And he certainly knew more than he could talk about with some CIA officers in the back of the room.
Yeah.
And, those sort of guys have almost always showed up at talks I give.
Yep.
And they're always, curious, and sometimes they'll say something, sometimes they won't.
Right.
But did they interact with Ben at all when he made this comment?
No. I didn't know who he was looking at. He was looking at somebody. He was just looking out in the room, and he said, I see two of my CIA friends are here today to listen to me.
Right.
And I'm sure they were trying to make sure he didn't say anything he wasn't supposed to say.
Right.
Or if he did, that they could contain it.
Not go too far off the reservation.
Right. And I could tell during this private Q&A that we had that he was looking around trying to figure out who was around him. And when he was saying things, he was very careful about how he said it. But the other thing was, I followed up. I asked him, I followed up about 2 weeks later. I literally looked in the phone book under the Ben Rich in Ventura where I lived, and he was in there.
Oh,
Ben
wow.
Rich. And I thought, wow. I mean, he lived in Oxnard at the time. And so I called him, and he answers the phone. And I said, hey, Ben, I said, this is Jan Harzan. You probably don't remember me, but I heard you speak 2 weeks ago at UCLA, and I thought you did a great job. I said, I'd love to have you come and speak to our group. I didn't tell him it was MUFON at the time, but I said, and he said, oh, yeah, I'd love to come talk to your group. He says, I'm writing a book. It's getting released here shortly, and I'm on a big radio tour across the country. And when I'm done with that, I'll come back to you. But I got to tell you, I'm battling cancer, and it's slowing me down quite a bit. And so I said, okay. I said, when should I check back with you? He said, why don't you call me in 6 months? Well, I called him back probably more like a year later, and he was deceased. He was gone.
Yeah, tragic.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was interesting. That was you said March of 93, and that was around the time that I had been approached by folks with the new president. At that time was Clinton, got inaugurated in January of 93. And as you know, my briefing for the director of the CIA was in December of 1993. And so that whole era, there were, let's call them cracks in the wall. And after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the dissolution of the Soviet Union, there were a lot of people I found who had approached me back in 91, 92, 93, who were amenable to the idea of this information coming out. And it looked like there was going to be sort of a détente domestically, and sort of a glasnost, an opening in the United States, like there had been in the old Soviet Union with the collapse of the Berlin Wall and elsewhere, the whole dissolution of the Soviet Union that occurred. But interestingly, the initiatives that started in that era, and he may have just been sticking his toe in the water a little bit with that revelation, seemed like really got cut off at the knees. And I know that after I briefed the CIA director, of course, prior to that, notwithstanding, since then the CIA directors denied the meeting ever took place, which is typical of Washington. I always tell people, how do you know they're lying? Their lips are moving. Right. That's how you know they're lying in Washington. If their lips are moving, they're lying. So as a rather unfavorable commentary, I just got back from DC last night, so I sort of have this.
There's some good people there.
There are a few good people. But my point is that the letter I got from the contact I had to the CIA director said, you're going to be the first person to brief the director of the CIA, because he and the president have made specific inquiries into the UFO subject and have been denied access and denied information. Now, at the time, honestly, I think probably like a lot of people listening went, that can't be true.
Right.
It's true. It's very, very highly compartmented, and they did not want this particular president to know. And of course, later I found out from Disclosure Project witnesses that when Carter in 76 got elected, during the transition between November and January when he was inaugurated, the outgoing director of the CIA was George Bush Sr., George H.W. Bush.
Right.
And in fact, if you go to the CIA now, it's the George Bush, CIA center.
Right.
So, is named after him. And he was on the committee dealing with the secrecy, but Woolsey wasn't at the time. I can't say that now, but at the time, because it was still a few months after he was, just a few months after he was appointed,
right,
and nominated and confirmed by the Senate. So, which is when I met with him. And I really thought that was a ruse. In my own heart of hearts, I thought this cannot be true.
Right.
But it was true.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out that Carter had the same thing happen, that when he asked the CIA director, outgoing, George Bush Sr., to tell him about UFOs, he said, I'm not going to tell you anything about this. Mm-hmm. But if you want to find out about it, see if you can get it from the Congressional Research Service. And you know the story that Marsha Bloom there then contacted Daniel Sheehan, who's also in Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, to look into it through the Vatican, because the Congressional Research Service had very little information. Although he eventually did get to see some top secret documents and photos of a crashed ET craft and what have you, as you know. She was able to see that, and he was able to just sort of like go into a place, see it, get some information, and leave. But so that in and of itself is a really interesting story. But imagine, here's you have the incoming president of the United States being denied access. And as you know, you may remember this, you probably have it in the MUFON archives, is that Carter was governor of Georgia, and he actually had a UFO sighting and filed a UFO report. There's an official report signed, Jimmy Carter, governor of Georgia. Right. I don't know if you've seen it, but
we have a copy of it. Yes.
Yeah, that was fascinating. So, this sort of thing. So when I think about Ben Rich talking in '93, March of '93, and it makes me wonder, how old was he at that time? Do you know?
Who's this again? Woolsey? Or
Ben Rich. Ben Rich.
Oh, Ben. Gosh, he was in his 70s. He was in his 70s.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So
I could check it real fast. I was just doing a look up on Woolsey here. Let me do a look up on.
Well, it doesn't matter. Anyway, he was retired at that point from the Skunk Works.
Yeah, he had retired after 40 years. They built their Skunk Works, and he wanted to share. You just think about it. If your life work is about doing this phenomenal stuff, but it's always been kept secret. You can't talk to your spouse about it. You can't tell your kids about it. Tell your friends about it.
Yeah.
I would think you're bursting at the seams to tell somebody the great stuff that you and your teammates did at the Lockheed Skunk Works. But they're all sworn to secrecy.
Yep, absolutely. And I know that I know other people who worked in those projects for Northrop Grumman, for Naval Research Labs, for SAIC.
Yep.
EG&G, some of the early man-made anti-grav devices were actually made by EG&G on the outskirts of the Nellis Range, so-called Area 51.
Yeah.
Way back. I mean, we're going, way back.
Yeah.
They were high voltage systems that would cause lift, and that actually goes back to. I have a colleague who's since passed away, who was the top scientist at the Naval Research Labs in Washington. And his name was Rick Foch, F-O-C-H. He's passed away now.
Yep.
But he actually got into the so-called vault that had all these top secret documents about this, and not redacted, blackened out. And he saw a document that explained that in October of 1954, we had mastered gravity control, at least to the point that we could get lift and under a controlled situation. So between 54 and now, there have been multiple generations of these that are made, which is why a lot of people will see these objects. And I always tell people, this is a document, I think you said you've seen this. This is from Ben Rich, from 1986. So that would have been 7 years before he spoke to you. And he was replying to a man named John Andrews, who had asked him, was it correct that he had said that there are two types of UFOs, man-made, and I'm quoting, extraterrestrial. And Ben Rich writes back, yes, they're both. So, and that was in '86. So, we know that Ben Rich certainly knew that there were actual ET ones, but he also knew there were ones that were man-made. Right. And he very curiously says, we call them UFOs unfunded opportunities.
Yeah.
Now, what that means is that they have a number of them, but they were never put public. Where we're still using jets and rockets from the 30s, 40s, 50s. I think we're high tech when we jump on a Dreamliner or Boeing. Mm-hmm. But I remember it was Peter Thiel who founded PayPal with Elon Musk, and he said, right, it still takes the same amount of time to fly from JFK to Paris or something like that now as it did in 1964. Right. We're still using the same, burning fuel, doing this and doing that. So, this is where I get up this idea that we sort of have a lost century of technology and development because of this secrecy. And I'm sure that Ben Rich, if he was up in those years, I didn't realize he was that old when he spoke to you guys.
Well, you know what? I just checked that. So he passed away January 5th, 1995 at 69. So he would have been 67 when he spoke to us.
Okay, 67. So that, but still that means that he really probably felt that this is something that needed to get dealt with, because this letter in '86 to a friend said that, these were unfunded opportunities, UFOs. And I think that, a lot of people I know who've worked in these projects have carried the weight of, I know when I first did the gathering in 1995 at Asilomar in California with the astronaut Edgar Mitchell and some of the cosmonauts from Russia. And you may not know about this meeting, but it was one we organized. It was a private meeting. And it was back when we had something called Project Starlight. Mm-hmm. So if you go to the Clinton Presidential Library and do a FOIA, you'll get documents about Project Starlight. Mm-hmm. That was the project I started to pull together some of these insiders and bring it out to the public. So we had our first meeting of, I think it was about 10 or maybe 15 top secret guys who'd worked on these projects in various ways, not just US, but also from the Soviet Union. And Marina Popovich's wife was there. Of course, he was the first man in space for the Soviet Union. I mean, he was not the first, but one of the top astronauts. He's sort of like Neil Armstrong is for us, is Popovich. But Marina also was a cosmonaut.
Right.
She was there. And we had all kinds of interesting discussions. That was all taped and videotaped. But someone that we entrusted to document that stole all the tapes, and we've never retrieved them.
Sounds like some other things I know about.
Yes. I mean, it was someone appearing to be a helpful person who was actually operating clandestinely. And of course, this has happened too many times for me to recount. It's too depressing. But anyway, my point is that was in '95. Right. And, by 2001, we did the National Press Club disclosure event because I'd concluded that neither the president nor the Congress was going to do anything about this.
Right.
And we decided to go public and sort of go move it into the public domain as much as we could as a volunteer nonprofit group. So that's how that happened. But, it would have been great to have had someone like Ben Rich there. Mm-hmm. But even at that level, what I've found is the more they know, the more they're followed. These CIA officers that were at his talk, and the more they are literally to the moment of death. And even if they're under anesthesia, they are monitored that they don't blurt things out.
Right. Oh yeah. No, absolutely. We get witnesses who come forward to share some pretty startling stories, and the next thing we get from them is, "Did you say anything to anybody? Because two guys just came to my house and told me to shut up." So, or reminded me of my oath. So all this stuff is very much closely followed. Absolutely.
I've never had that happen.
Okay.
And I have 985 people now
Really?
Information, including people recently in these projects. And here's why. I don't know if you know this. In 1997, wrote a letter to every agency, and remember, it's in our documents at seriousdisclosure.com.
Right.
And it was what's called a UNOD letter. And that stands for unless otherwise directed. And it's a military strategy, basically, a tactic. Mm-hmm. And one of my military advisors said, look, here's what you need to do. Because we had made the assessment, and along with the attorney, constitutional attorney Sheehan, and some other people on my team, that these unacknowledged special access projects were in fact being run illegally, without oversight from the president, a lot of the top people at the Pentagon, and members of Congress. And therefore, the projects were, by definition, illegal. Mm-hmm. And so I wrote a letter saying, it is our assessment, after having briefed the CIA director, and by then I had briefed the head of intelligence, Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Wilson. Everybody's probably heard about the Wilson document leaks. Mm-hmm. So I brought the astronaut Edgar Mitchell and one of Eisenhower's aides who knew about the UFO issue, and a couple other people to this briefing with Admiral Wilson at the Pentagon. And it was what they call a stand-up briefing, and I was the briefer, and the others were just there participating, sort of watching. And the Admiral revealed to us that I had, sent him one of these documents from Nellis Airport, so-called Area 51. And this is the document. It's on the top of the briefing document for the presidents that I've dealt with since I got this. And it's a National Reconnaissance Office document, NRO, and it lists the code names and project code numbers as of 91. Mm-hmm. And this was in 97 when I was meeting with the head of intelligence, J2, for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Tom Wilson. And he had gotten this document before the meeting just as a background, but he recognized one of the names, and he called him up. And he said, this is Admiral Wilson and blah, blah. And they go, yes, sir, we know who you are. He says, well, I want to be read into this project. I mean, read in means briefed. Right. And they turn to him, they say, sir, we can't discuss this with you. You don't have a need to know. Now, this is the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I want everyone to listen very carefully to this. This is the guy who puts together the intelligence assessment for the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the United States, Pentagon. Mm-hmm. And he was being brushed aside from this unacknowledged special access project, which is why I know when we wrote this letter, I said, look, we've met with the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, head of the CIA, head of Intelligence Joint Staff, numerous other senior officers at the Pentagon. Remember, I personally briefed the senator from Nevada, who, of course, is where Area 51 is. Right. And Senator Richard Bryan, met with him personally. He had absolutely no knowledge of these areas. And so it goes on and on and on and on and on. The man in charge of the House Oversight and Reform Committee that's supposed to oversee all these things, Dan Burton of Indiana, Republican, met with him. And then, of course, you set up a meeting with your congressman, remember?
Right. We both went.
We both went. And
Cox. It was Christopher Cox.
Christopher Cox. He later became head of the SEC for Baby Bush Jr. But he was a congressman from Orange County, I believe.
Yeah, he was.
Yep. And he also said, look, I have not officially received any information on this. Where are these facilities? And I don't know if you've seen, I put, because of his question, put together updating a document. I call it the Cox memo for Congressman Cox. That is a list of all the top secret underground bases, facilities, contractors, where they are, where they're located. And I put that out to the public now. But initially I did it for him, if you recall. Yeah. You were at the meeting.
Oh, yeah. No, the two things that stand out to me from that meeting were, well, first off, that we didn't get thrown out of his office because we're talking about UFOs. He was very polite about the whole thing. Yep. His brother-in-law is an astronaut, as a matter of fact. His wife's brother is an astronaut. But the two things that stand out to me was one, him asking us the question, how are they funding this? Which I was like, I don't know. We had ideas, but we both didn't want to say them because we thought it would really ruin our credibility. I was thinking CIA money, drug money. But the other one was when he asked, where's this being done at? And I'll write a congressional letter and send it to these locations and tell them to tell us what they're doing. And I was thinking to myself, because just before that, Walter Schiff had tried this. I think it was named Walter Schiff. I could be wrong. Down in New Mexico, had tried this in Roswell, asking for the Roswell records. And lo and behold, a year later, he dies of cancer.
Yep.
Oh, and by the way, when they came back with an answer, it was, oh, those records are missing.
Of course they're missing.
You know, it's like, okay, I mean, so where are all these records? Where are all these records these people grab and take? Where do they put them? I think they throw them in a big bonfire myself.
If you enjoyed this video, make sure to check out the next one right here on the Best of Dr. Stephen Greer.